Well, Congress is back after the holidays, and one of the first things they will do force President Obama to veto a repeal bill of the Affordable Care Act.
Yeah, joining us now to discuss this and some of today's recent developments is Congressman Ryan Zinke. Congressman, thanks for joining us here on Newsmax Now. We want to ask you about the president's executive action on gun control, obviously, but first, today in Afghanistan, one U.S. Special Operations soldier was killed, others wounded during a firefight with the Taliban. As a former Navy SEAL, what does this tell us about the current status of U.S. combat troops in Afghanistan?
Well, I think our force structure is too small. If you're going to go to war, you need to make sure you have the right equipment, the right training, and the right rules of engagement to win decisively in the field of battle. I don't think our rules of engagement are in a place where we can win. And when you're bunkered up, you're turtled up, you're on defense, there's only one way to win, is you have to be on offense, and you have to have the force package and force structure to do that. And I think we've drawn down our troops too far. The chain of command has been convoluted, where even the ground force commander doesn't have direct access to his air or his artillery, and I think we need to correct that.
Yeah, and Afghanistan clearly needs more attention from the media and from the presidential candidates, and also from a lot of Americans as well, because we are obviously still fighting a war, as you indicated there. Congressman Zinke, President Obama also today got pretty emotional talking about gun control. At one point, it seemed like he was wiping tears from his face. I don't want to suggest that that show of emotion was fake or staged in any way, but if he cares this much, don't you think he'd want to try to pass something that could not be undone by the next president and try to get more backing from Congress on these types of gun control measures?
Well, I think if he trained his sights more on terrorism and not on taking guns away from law-abiding citizens, I think he'd get a lot further. But he's rested against something called the Constitution. And there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. The Constitution clearly outlines our rights to bear firearms, and I don't think it's any surprise he thinks he can infringe on that, and Congress is going to stand against him.
Speaking of the Constitution, Alan Dershowitz told Newsmax TV's J.D. Hayworth just yesterday that congressional inaction is not a good enough reason to forego the constitutional process. Let's take a listen.
If Congress doesn't act, it means Congress acted to not act. That's a decision. When Congress doesn't act, that's a decision legislatively taken by one branch of the government. The president can't just act because Congress doesn't act.
Well, of course, he also said that the executive orders would likely stand as long as President Obama lives in the White House, just like his executive orders on immigration and the rest of the stuff that he's done. If Alan Dershowitz says it's constitutional overreach, why can't you guys on Capitol Hill stop this kind of stuff, Congressman?
Well, the tools available to us are to defund, take him to court, which he's been in court multiple times, and which we will. The Constitution, again, lays it out very clearly that as individual rights, we have a right to bear arms, and that shall not be infringed. And when you have government programs looking at technology, how to reduce access to weapons, that, in my judgment, that's clearly an infringement on our constitutional rights, and I think Congress will act.
The other issue we want to talk about, Congressman, Obamacare. There have been dozens of Obamacare repeal votes in Congress, as you know, but briefly, let's talk about the importance of actually forcing the president to veto this piece of legislation.
Well, I think, you look at it in a football analogy, we're bringing the ball to the field. That's the first time we brought something before the president's desk. And you look at the goals of what Obamacare tried to do. Accessible, affordability, and quality health care, and it's failed on all three of those. What this does through the budget reconciliation is de-wind some of the mechanisms that are hurting smaller businesses. We know that the healthcare access has been limited in business, and business decisions are being made not on the basis of product innovation, but on the basis of affordability just in the healthcare package. So this does take a look at that. It reduces it. It repeals some of the problems with Obamacare. Certainly, I think Congress this year will be much more aggressive and on the offensive on repeal and replace.
One last question for you, Congressman, about 30 seconds left. What are the chances that they actually get a replacement for Obamacare bill to the president's desk this year?
Well, so I look at it from a naval perspective. We know this ship is sinking. Before you abandon it completely, it would be a good idea to get a lifeboat. That lifeboat must be smaller. It must be more agile, flexible, and give the states more say in how to do it. What works in Washington, D.C. or New York City oftentimes doesn't work out in Billings, Montana, or elsewhere in the country, and we need flexibility in the system. But you have to go back to 3 goals: affordability, quality health care, and access. And I think together we can do that.
All right, Congressman Ryan Zinke, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you.
All right, coming up next on Newsmax Now.
You want someone to read one hell of a bedtime story? Ted Cruz is your guy. Rick Santorum's your president.
Well, the knives are out. We take a look at the new wave of GOP attack ads. Will they eventually make the nominee stronger or weaker after all the carnage? And America's heroin epidemic, why this issue could have a major impact on the New Hampshire primaries. Plus, former Trump advisor Sam Nunberg talks to us about the GOP frontrunner and what he has riding on Iowa and New Hampshire.